Clouds rose from every military convoy moving through the ancient island, mixing with the acrid smell of gunpowder and diesel fuel. Two men, separated by miles of treacherous terrain but united in their fierce determination, were locked in a race that would define their legacies forever. General George S. Patton Jr. sat in his command tent outside Palermo, his pearl-handled revolvers gleaming at his hips. His jaw was clenched so tight you could hear his teeth grinding. Across the map sprawled before him, a red line marked Montgomery's projected route to Messina. That British son of a gun was going to beat him there. Over his dead body. Patton had grown up in California, the son of a wealthy family with deep military roots. His childhood was filled with stories of cavalry charges and heroic last stands. He believed he was destined for greatness, that he was the reincarnation of ancient warriors. Some called him eccentric. Others called him brilliant. His men called him old blood and guts, though they joked that it was their blood and his guts. Meanwhile, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery commanded the British Eighth Army with methodical precision. Monty, as everyone called him, was everything Patton was not. Calculated where Patton was impulsive. Reserved where Patton was flamboyant. The British officer had earned his reputation through careful planning and devastating effectiveness in North Africa. He wore his trademark beret and carried himself with an air of quiet superiority that drove Patton absolutely insane. The rivalry had been brewing since they first met in North Africa. During planning sessions, Montgomery would outline his strategies with mathematical precision while Patton fumed silently, his fingers drumming on the table. When Eisenhower announced the Sicily invasion, codenamed Operation Husky, he gave Montgomery the main thrust toward Messina. Patton's 7th Army was relegated to protecting Montgomery's left flank. Protecting the flank. The words tasted like poison in Patton's mouth. His aide, Captain Richard Jensen, entered the tent carrying fresh intelligence reports. The young officer from Iowa had learned to read Patton's moods like a weatherman reads storm clouds. Right now, the general was a Category 5 hurricane waiting to make landfall. General, the latest reports show Montgomery's forces have captured Augusta. They're making steady progress up the eastern coast, Jensen reported, his voice carefully neutral. Patton slammed his fist on the map table, sending pencils rolling across the contours of Sicily. Steady progress. That tortoise thinks he's going to crawl his way to glory while we sit here with our thumbs up our backsides. Sir, our orders are clear. We're to maintain position and protect the... I know what our orders are, Captain, Patton snapped, but his eyes never left the map. Those steel blue eyes that had stared down enemy fire were now calculating angles, distances, possibilities. Tell me about the roads through central Sicily. The ones leading to Palermo. Jensen hesitated. Sir, Palermo isn't our objective. Messina is the prize. That's where we cut off the German retreat. Patton's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. Exactly. And if we take Palermo first, we control the entire western half of the island. Then we swing east and race Montgomery to Messina. We don't protect his flank, Captain. We beat him to the finish line. The audacity of the plan hung in the air like cordite. Jensen knew that deviating from Eisenhower's orders could end Patton's career. But he also knew that stopping Patton once he set his mind to something was like trying to stop a Sherman tank with harsh language. Back in his headquarters, Montgomery studied his own maps with tea growing cold at his elbow. His chief of staff, Brigadier Miles Graham, stood at attention nearby. The British general's forces had landed successfully on Sicily's southeastern beaches and were pushing northward against stiffening German resistance. The Americans are being rather quiet, Montgomery mused, his finger tracing the expected route to Messina. One would think Patton would be chomping at the bit. Perhaps he's finally learned the value of following orders, sir, Graham suggested. Montgomery allowed himself a thin smile. George Patton following orders. That would be a first. No, he's planning something. I can feel it. The man has all the subtlety of a charging rhinoceros. Nevertheless, sir, your plan is sound. We push up Highway 114, take Catania, then drive straight to Messina. Textbook advance. Indeed, Montgomery agreed, but something nagged at him. In North Africa, he had learned never to underestimate the Americans, especially not their most volatile general. Patton was reckless, but he was also cunning. That combination made him dangerous. 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., newspapers were already comparing the two generals. The New York Times ran competing profiles, painting Patton as the dashing cavalryman and Montgomery as the master tactician. American readers ate it up. Who would reach Messina first? Would British precision triumph over American audacity? Back in Sicily, Patton stood outside his tent as the sun set over the Mediterranean. Somewhere across those mountains, Montgomery was probably sipping tea and congratulating himself on his superior strategy. "Not this time, Monty," Patton whispered to the dying light. "Not this damn time." July 17, 1943. Patton made his move. Without waiting for formal approval from Allied headquarters, he launched his forces toward Palermo in a lightning strike that caught everyone off guard. His tanks roared across the Sicilian interior, kicking up massive dust storms that could be seen for miles. The German defenders, expecting a cautious American advance, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer speed and aggression of the assault. When word reached Montgomery's headquarters, the British general nearly choked on his morning tea. "He did what?" Montgomery demanded, his usual composure cracking like ice under pressure. Graham cleared his throat nervously. "Patton has taken Palermo, sir. The entire western half of Sicily is now under American control. He captured it in just 4 days." Montgomery's face flushed red. "That cowboy has abandoned his assignment. He was supposed to protect our flank, not go gallivanting across the island chasing headlines." But the damage was done. American newspapers exploded with headlines celebrating Patton's bold maneuver. The New York Herald-Tribune declared him a modern-day Alexander the Great. Radio broadcasts from CBS painted vivid pictures of American tanks rolling triumphantly through Palermo's ancient streets while grateful Sicilians threw flowers. Montgomery stared at his map with barely controlled fury. Palermo was a strategic footnote, a port city that meant little to the overall objective. But Patton had turned it into a publicity coup. Now every reporter in the Mediterranean theater was writing about the dashing American general who seized a major city while the methodical British plodded along the coast. The real insult came that evening when Eisenhower's headquarters sent a terse message: "Continue mission as planned. Patton's 7th Army will now advance eastward toward Messina." They legitimized his insubordination, Montgomery muttered bitterly. Graham wisely said nothing. Meanwhile, Patton was euphoric. He stood in Palermo's royal palace, boots planted firmly on marble floors where Norman kings once walked. Photographers captured him in his element, helmet polished to a mirror shine, those ivory-handled revolvers catching the sunlight streaming through ancient windows. Captain Jensen approached with a message flimsy. "Sir, General Eisenhower wants a word." "He doesn't sound pleased." Patton waved dismissively. "I can chew me out all he wants after I beat Montgomery to Messina. Right now, we have a race to win. Get the 2nd Armored Division moving. I want them on Highway 113 heading east before Montgomery even finishes his breakfast." The race was officially on. Two massive armies, allied in name but rivals in spirit, now sprinted toward the same prize. Messina sat at Sicily's northeastern tip, the gateway to mainland Italy. Whoever got there first would claim not just a tactical victory but something far more valuable in the eyes of history: bragging rights. Montgomery pushed his forces harder, demanding night marches and accepting higher casualty rates. Patton drove his men like demons, personally appearing at forward positions to spur them onward. The tension between the two commanders became the worst-kept secret in the Allied High Command. July 23. The situation reached its breaking point. Montgomery's 8th Army slammed into a German defensive line at Catania that wouldn't budge. The Germans had transformed the ancient city into a fortress, with machine gun nests covering every approach and artillery zeroed in on every road. British casualties mounted by the hour. Each attempt to break through was met with devastating fire. Montgomery stood in his command post, staring at casualty reports that made his stomach turn. 63 men lost in the morning assault alone. Another 42 in the afternoon push. And they had gained exactly nothing. "This is unacceptable," he said quietly, the words heavy with frustration. "We're bleeding ourselves white against fixed defenses while Patton prances up an undefended highway." Graham hesitated before speaking. "Sir, intelligence reports suggest the Germans have stripped forces from the northern route to reinforce Catania. They expected us to be the main threat, not the Americans." The realization hit Montgomery like a physical blow. The Germans had played right into Patton's hands. By taking Palermo and swinging east, Patton had found the path of least resistance while Montgomery faced the full weight of German defensive doctrine. Meanwhile, Patton's columns raced along Sicily's northern coast like thoroughbreds at Saratoga. The terrain was treacherous, winding mountain roads with sheer drops to the Mediterranean below, but resistance was sporadic. Small German units fought delaying actions before falling back. Nothing could stop the American momentum. Patton rode in an open jeep near the front of his advance, ignoring protests from his staff about safety. He wanted his men to see him, to know that old blood and guts was right there with them. When they encountered a destroyed bridge, Patton personally supervised engineers as they threw up a Bailey Bridge in record time. "Keep moving," he shouted at every unit he passed. "Montgomery is stuck at Catania eating British biscuits and drinking tea. We're going to Messina, and we're going to get there first." His troops, exhausted and covered in dust, somehow found the energy to cheer. Patton had that effect. He made men believe they could do the impossible. If you're enjoying this story of one of history's most intense military rivalries, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. What happens next will show you why Patton and Montgomery's relationship shaped the entire course of World War II. The final dash to Messina is about to begin, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. By July 28, the strategic picture was crystal clear. Montgomery remained bogged down, forced to execute a costly amphibious end run around Catania just to keep moving. Patton, meanwhile, was within striking distance of Messina. His lead elements reported they could see the city's harbor in the distance. The race that Montgomery thought he had won before it started was slipping through his fingers. And Patton, that theatrical American showman, was about to claim the greatest prize of the Sicily campaign. August 16, 1943. The final hours. Patton's forces were tantalizingly close to Messina, but the Germans had one last surprise waiting. A crack SS unit had set up a defensive position in the hills overlooking the coastal highway. They had orders to delay the Americans for at least 48 hours, buying time for the main German forces to evacuate across the Strait of Messina to mainland Italy. The firefight erupted at dawn. German 88mm guns opened up on the lead American column, destroying 3 Sherman tanks in the opening salvo. The entire advance ground to a halt as machine gun fire swept the road. Bodies of American soldiers littered the asphalt. Patton arrived at the scene within the hour, his jeep skidding to a stop behind a knocked-out tank. Captain Jensen jumped out, frantically gesturing for the general to take cover as bullets whined overhead. "Sir, we need to pull back and call in artillery. This position is too strong for a frontal assault." Patton ignored him completely. He stood in the middle of the road, binoculars raised, studying the German positions with absolute calm while chaos erupted around him. A bullet sparked off the pavement 3 feet from his boot. He didn't flinch. "Get me the 3rd Battalion commander. Now." 10 minutes later, Patton had organized a flanking maneuver that sent 2 companies of infantry scrambling up the mountainside while tanks provided covering fire. He coordinated the assault personally, standing exposed on a hillside, pointing and shouting orders like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. His soldiers, seeing their general refuse to take cover, fought with renewed fury. They couldn't let old blood and guts down. Not when he was standing right there with them. The German position broke by noon. American forces poured through the gap, racing toward Messina with renewed urgency. Every man in Patton's army knew what was at stake now. Montgomery's forces had finally broken through at Catania and were advancing rapidly up the eastern coast. Intelligence reported British units were less than 20 miles from Messina. It was going to be close. Impossibly close. Patton drove his men mercilessly through the night. No sleep. No rest. Just constant forward movement. Truck engines overheated. Men collapsed from exhaustion. But the columns kept moving. Montgomery, receiving reports of his own advance, felt victory within his grasp. His forces had overcome tremendous obstacles. They had fought the bulk of the German defenders. By any reasonable measure, they deserved to reach Messina first. But war isn't reasonable. And neither was George Patton. At 10:15 a.m. on August 17, advance elements of Patton's 3rd Division rolled into Messina's outskirts. The Stars and Stripes went up over the city center at 10:23 a.m. Montgomery's lead units arrived at 10:45 a.m. 30 minutes. After 10 days of brutal racing across Sicily, Patton had beaten Montgomery by 30 minutes. Montgomery's jeep rolled into Messina to find American flags already flying from every government building. The streets were filled with jubilant GIs celebrating their victory. Patton had even set up his headquarters in the best hotel overlooking the harbor. The British general sat in his vehicle for a long moment, jaw clenched, watching American soldiers pose for photographs in front of captured German equipment. His driver, Corporal Davies, kept his eyes straight ahead, wisely saying nothing. When Montgomery finally climbed out, he was met by an American colonel who saluted crisply. "General Patton is expecting you, sir. He's arranged lunch." The meeting was everything Montgomery had dreaded. Patton stood in the hotel's dining room, immaculate in his dress uniform, those revolvers gleaming at his hips. His smile was wide and entirely too pleased with itself. "Monty, so glad you could make it. We saved you some wine. Italian vintage. Not bad for local stuff." Montgomery's handshake was perfunctory. "Congratulations, George. Your advance was quite rapid." Patton's grin widened. "Rapid. That's one word for it. I prefer historic. 10 days from Palermo to Messina. That's got to be some kind of record." The lunch was excruciating for Montgomery. Patton held court, regaling his staff with stories of the campaign while photographers captured every moment. The American press corps was already filing stories about the dramatic race and Patton's triumphant victory. But as the meal progressed, something unexpected happened. Patton's bombast softened. Over cognac, away from the cameras, the two generals talked strategy. Montgomery outlined the horrific casualties his forces had sustained at Catania. Patton, for once, listened without interrupting. "You faced the bulk of their defensive strength," Patton admitted quietly. "My route was easier because the Germans expected you to be the main threat. You drew their fire." Montgomery looked at him sharply, surprised by the acknowledgement. "Doesn't change who got here first," Patton continued, but his tone lacked its earlier swagger. "Your boys fought like hell, Monty. Don't let anyone tell you different." It was the closest thing to respect Montgomery had ever heard from Patton. The British general nodded slowly. "Your drive through the interior was brilliant, George. Unorthodox, against orders, and completely brilliant." Both men smiled slightly, the tension easing for the first time since they had met. That evening, Eisenhower arrived in Messina to find both generals professionally cordial. He took Patton aside and delivered a blistering private rebuke for disobeying orders and showboating. Patton accepted it without argument, knowing he had accomplished exactly what he set out to do. Montgomery wrote in his diary that night, "Patton is insufferable, reckless, and impossible to work with. He is also, I must admit, one hell of a fighting general. The Americans are lucky to have him, even if they don't always know what to do with him." The Sicily campaign was over. The race was won. But more importantly, both generals had proven something to each other and to history. June 1944. 11 months later. The invasion of Normandy was underway, and the Allied command structure had been completely reorganized. Montgomery commanded all ground forces for the initial phase of Operation Overlord. Patton, sidelined after the infamous slapping incidents in Sicily, waited in England as a decoy, his presence there fooling German intelligence about where the real invasion would occur. The irony wasn't lost on either man. Montgomery had the bigger command, but Patton's very reputation was valuable enough that Eisenhower used him as a strategic deception. The Germans were so terrified of Patton that they kept entire divisions in reserve, waiting for him to land at Calais. When Patton finally got his Third Army activated in France that August, he unleashed the same aggressive tactics that had won Sicily. His armored columns raced across France, liberating territory at speeds that shocked even Montgomery. By September, Patton's forces had advanced so far that they outran their supply lines. The two generals met again at a strategy conference in France. Montgomery arrived in his trademark beret. Patton wore his polished helmet and those ever-present revolvers. The tension was still there, the rivalry as fierce as ever, but something had changed. "Still trying to beat me everywhere we go, George?" Montgomery asked with the hint of a smile. Patton laughed. "Only when it matters, Monty. Only when it matters." They argued about strategy for hours, Patton pushing for an aggressive thrust into Germany, Montgomery advocating for his single concentrated drive to the Ruhr. Eisenhower ultimately sided with a broad front approach, frustrating both of them equally. After the war ended in May 1945, journalists loved to pit them against each other. Who was the better general? Whose tactics were superior? The debate raged in newspapers and military journals. Patton died in December 1945 from injuries sustained in a car accident in Germany. When Montgomery heard the news, he sat quietly in his office for a long time. Finally, he wrote a letter to Patton's widow. George was impossible, brilliant, infuriating, and irreplaceable. The Allied victory in Europe is as much his achievement as anyone's. Montgomery lived until 1976, long enough to see their rivalry become the stuff of legend. In his final memoir, he devoted an entire chapter to Patton and the race to Messina. The chapter ended with a simple admission: "He beat me fair and square that day in Sicily. It still bothers me." The race to Messina lasted only 10 days, but its impact echoed through history. It showed the world that American forces could compete with anyone. It proved that audacity sometimes trumps caution. Most importantly, it revealed that even bitter rivals could respect each other's greatness. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story of rivalry, courage, and military genius. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling us what historical rivalry you'd like to hear about next. There are so many amazing stories waiting to be told, and we want to share them with you. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest competitors bring out the best in each other.